Good evening. This is Wednesday, January 2nd, 307 days until the 2008 presidential election, the night before the Iowa caucuses. Iowa, consisting of 1/100th of the nation's population, an estimated 6% of whom will caucus tomorrow, meaning the first milestone of the campaign to elect the 44th president will be determined by 6/100ths of 1% of the country. In our fifth story on the countdown, with such wrong end of the telescope proportions, it should perhaps come as no surprise that the outcome of tomorrow's Democratic contest could now hinge on Dennis Kucinich, the Ohio congressman with absolutely no chance of winning the caucuses nor the nomination itself, asking his supporters to back Senator Barack Obama. If he fails to meet the so-called viability voting threshold, you get at least 15% or you get nothing. In 2004, Congressman Kucinich, having thrown his support in a similar manner to Senator Edwards, which helped Mr. Edwards finish second in Iowa that year. Senator Obama with the apparent momentum tonight, according to the latest Des Moines Register poll, the Illinois Democrat with a lead that is double the margin of error of 3.5%. Heading into tomorrow's caucuses, he's at 32%, with Senators Clinton and Edwards in a statistical tie for second and 25% and 24%, respectively. I don't know why it says Hillary and everybody else's last name is there. On the Republican side, Governor Huckabee out in front, also at 32%, trailing him at 26%, Governor Romney, Senator McCain at 13%, but that number may be rising. More on the Republican race presently with Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post. First, the indecision of Democratic voters in the Hawkeye State, perhaps represented best by Susan Klopfer, the Iowa precinct captain, who publicly switched her support and her lawn signs from Clinton to Obama about 3 weeks ago, posting a video blog on the Obama campaign website. Go out there and get another new sign. Ms. Klopfer showing up at an Edwards house party this morning, saying it was because she's on the verge of switching again, if not to Edwards, then perhaps to New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson. Al Gore, if you're watching, you might still get an organization together in Iowa if you call Ms. Klopfer before sunrise. The top three Democratic candidates doing their best to win over every Susan Klopfer in Iowa tonight by making last-minute direct appeals during tonight's local newscasts in the state, 2-minute-long saturation purchases across Iowa. Mrs. Clinton by promising a new beginning, if not a new diet.
As we start this new year, America is at a crossroads. We're a nation at war in a dangerous world. We have a faltering economy, an energy crisis, and 47 million people without health care. But after 7 long years of this administration, we finally have the opportunity for a new beginning. Tomorrow, you can take the first step. After all the town meetings, the pie and coffee, it comes down to this.
Mr. Obama, in his almost saturation eve of caucus 2-minute commercial, sticking with a theme that has made him a contender, promising a new direction.
Tomorrow will come to the end of a 10-month journey. You've heard from all of us and read our plans. You've been bombarded with mailings and phone calls, and you'll be glad to know this is one of the last times you'll hear me say, I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message. But the question you have to ask yourself when you walk into that caucus tomorrow is this: who can take us in a fundamentally new direction? I'm running to finally solve problems we talk about year after year after year, to end the division, the obscene influence of lobbyists, and the politics that values scoring points over making progress. We can't afford more of that. Not this year. Not now.
Former Senator Edwards, meanwhile, taking perhaps the most radical approach, deciding his candidacy would best be served at the last moment if he did not appear in his direct appeal at all.
I myself was a former Maytag employee. I was laid off September of 2004, and I was asked, would you and your family like to come up and meet Senator Edwards? And this is something I'll never forget. He grabbed my 7-year-old son by the hand. He dropped to one knee and he looked him straight in the eye. And he said, I'm going to keep fighting for your daddy's job. I promise you that. You know, that stuff sticks with you. That's the kind of things we need in a leader in this country. Not somebody that's going to go to a big fundraiser and say, write me a check for $2,300 and I'll let you know you have my support. I want a guy that's going to sit down and look a 7-year-old kid in the eye. Tell him I'm going to fight for your dad's job.
Let's turn now to our correspondent David Schuster, who's covering the action in Des Moines tonight. David, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
The key phrase in that Kucinich news release asking his supporters to back Obama is the clause that says, if he does not make the 15% threshold. Review that rule off the top for those who might not be familiar with it or who think they are and need a clever way to avoid actually coming out and asking what it means and why it's so important.
Well, it just applies to the Democratic caucuses. There are 1,800 precincts across the state, so 1,800 places tomorrow night where people will be standing for a particular candidate. If in one of the precincts, for example, Keith, Dennis Kucinich were to get just 14 people standing for him, he would not reach that magic 15% viability in order to essentially make it to the next round. So what the Kucinich caucus scores would have to do is they would have to convince somebody else, one of the other 86 at the particular precinct, to join them, or they would then have to go to a second choice. The original intent was to try to make sure that the results were not so dispersed that there were not clear results, but essentially to have the Iowa Democrats register some preferences, some clear preferences, and that is what happens when you eliminate candidates who do not reach the 15% in every precinct.
So that begs the obvious question that if Kucinich has already done this and essentially thrown provisionally his support to Obama, what about the other ones who are less than likely to get 15% on the first ballot tomorrow? Is there jockeying underway, negotiating, or people buying and selling 200 votes at a time in Iowa?
Yeah, absolutely, Keith. And that's why you've heard, even, for example, there was Joe Biden criticizing Hillary Clinton for some statements she made about Pakistan. And yet the Clinton campaign went out of its way to praise Joe Biden, to say nice things about him and Chris Dodd and Bill Richardson, with the understanding that there might be some precincts around the state where Joe Biden will not reach the magic 15%, where Clinton wants to be the second choice. And that's where John Edwards may have something of an advantage, because in the latest polls, when Iowa Democrats were asked, okay, who's your second choice, never mind your first, John Edwards would then come out ahead. So you hear the Edwards campaign, Obama, Hillary Clinton saying all these nice things about people who are still taking shots at them with the hope that these frontrunners can then appeal on the second round and thereby boost their percentage tomorrow night.
Tim Russert said tonight on Nightly News that all of his off-the-record sources in the Democratic camps are saying this is so tight that their pollsters have literally no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. To some degree, does that discount the value of this poll from the Des Moines Register? Does that paper not have a pretty sharp track record?
Well, here's the problem with the latest poll, and that is it gave something like 60%. It predicted 60% would be first-time caucus goers tomorrow night. It was 30% 4 years ago, so a lot of people have problems with that aspect of the poll, and also the aspect that suggested that 45% would be non-Democrats. However, having said that, and despite all the criticism that even the Obama campaign has been registering at people who are criticizing the polls, despite all of that, the Des Moines Register does have a history of getting it right. If you look back at the last Des Moines Register poll in 2004, Kerry 26, Edwards 23, Dean 20, Gephardt 18. The results were Kerry, Edwards, Dean, and Gephardt, with the numbers boosted, Keith, largely because of the viability issue. People who are choosing Kerry, Edwards, and Dean in their second round, essentially boosting their numbers.
MSNBC's David Schuster for us in Des Moines tonight, and he'll be back for us tomorrow night. We'll talk to you then, David. Thanks.